Hello, everyone, and welcome to Blue Balloon Theatre's very last podcast of 2024. Oh my God, I can't believe it. I'm here with the incredible Goodnighttheskye. This is like talk me through this name first and foremost. Is that your stage name?
Yeah. I exclusively perform under Goodnighttheskye. There are boring logistical reasons for this. I have a professional writing job outside of poetry, and so
Oh,
I don't want someone to be looking for poetry and find articles about SEO. And similarly, I don't want someone to be looking for like marketing materials and stumble across a poem about like BDSM. And so I have to keep the things delineated. Um, and when I was deciding that I wanted to do that, I just stuck with my Instagram handle that I've had since I was about 16 years old because I like it. And so
I
it
love
became,
it.
yeah.
It's
Yeah.
so distinctly different from a lot of other people. Like I have a stage name, which is Rebecca Vivian. Very few people actually know my real name, which is very exciting. But that's it is a family name, so it doesn't feel too strange. But that's like a real title, which I love, and we kind of dived straight in there as well, which I also love. It's how I like to do things on this podcast because we
We love it.
often I know we just get chatting about all kinds. But let's chat about your writing. You've said there that you write outside of poetry, you write
Mhm.
elsewhere. But when it comes to poetry and creative writing in that way, how did you first get started with that?
So I've been writing creatively for like as long as I could form coherent thoughts, I guess. But I pivoted to poetry very specifically and intentionally in uni because my high school and college band disbanded, did what bands do, and went their separate ways. I was their primary lyricist, and we all had different things we wanted to do. One of us wanted to pursue music super seriously. One of us wanted to pursue theatre. One of us wanted to pursue, I guess, academics and academia. And I felt the void that left fairly profoundly. And then I stumbled into an open mic in my first year of uni and realized that poetry could give me what music did, but I didn't have to rely on anybody else for it. You know what I mean? Like it could just be me. And that terrified me and also kind of thrilled me. And the pragmatic part of that was I was like, no more bringing gear to venues. No more having to find someone to drive me. I can just rock up, and the most I'll ever need to bring is a microphone. And that held a lot of enticement for me, I think. And so it slotted into the gap in my life that music had left. And then I realized fairly quickly that um, I was more taken with it than I ever had been with being in a band. For all the benefits of it, I like this way more.
That's so interesting. And I kind of like how your creative practice is so multidisciplinary. Even now, I know you as being a multidisciplinary sort of artist. Obviously, poetry is a massive part of that. But you have a very distinct style, both generally and when you read. And having seen you read very recently at Punk for Pay in Ancoats, Manchester, it was a very nice event, very nice venue as well.
Gorgeous venue.
It was, wasn't it? It was like
Mhm.
dimly lit, jazz music, loved it. But I remember watching you there thinking, wow, I'm genuinely quite taken with your style. It feels quite uh very very honest, and I really appreciate that because you do get honest poetry from a lot of people, but I feel like you went where a lot of people are often scared to go, and you sort of said it as it was. Do you feel that in your own work?
Um, honestly, no. The critique I level at myself most frequently is that I'm not honest enough because the way I construct my poetry is very like flowery. There's a lot of like imagery in there. There's a lot of like fantastical things that I bring in. I talk through the lens of monsters more than I talk about like through the lens of just real humans. And a lot of poets I admire are just straight up autobiographical and straight up confessional, and they don't let any kind of imagery hide the plot. Whereas many times I've read pieces at open mics and people have asked me like, what is that really about? You know what I mean? So like, I think I do have a kind of instinctive earnestness where I don't put any kind of emotional walls up, but to compensate for that, I throw a lot of metaphors down on the page to like make myself safe and make my audience safe, and because it's fun.
Yeah.
And so sometimes I worry my work is way too opaque and not honest enough. So it's wild when people say that they're not getting that. That's really helpful.
Honestly, that is crazy. Like, I genuinely wouldn't have thought you were gonna. I genuinely didn't think you were gonna say that. And I'm quite surprised. But I think also I felt a great connection to your work and the
Mhm,
metaphors and the imagery that you used. Obviously, they are brilliant tools to tell stories, and
mhm,
that for me, as a poet and an actor, that is something that I'm constantly drawn towards is how people tell stories. And I think through that, I found a sense of honest, uh, sort of relatability in your work. So
mhm.
I'm in a way, I'm really pleased that I've surprised you with that because
I'm delighted.
it was just, yeah, you had a really charismatic energy as well when you were reading. And I remember just before you went up, you were like, "Oh, I feel like I've got to up my game." Like, and I was like, "Why?" I honestly, I don't know where that came from, but I'm saying this to everybody that's listening and to you, like you are brilliant. You are
Thank
really
you.
brilliant. Anyway, that's enough of
I
that.
mean, we should state for the record, the caliber of talent at Punk for Pay was like out of this world. There's no wonder I felt intimidated because it was
It,
stacked. Everyone was exceptional. And so it
yeah,
wasn't so much like a self-deprecatory, like, oh no, I'm terrible. I just was like, wow, I really need to bring every trick I've got in the book to like stand aside these people. And it felt
yeah.
good to do. It was fun to do. So,
Do you feel that in other cities as well? Obviously, we kind of chatted on the night about how Manchester's open mic scene is
mhm,
very it's quite competitive in a lot of ways, but there are a lot of big characters that
mhm.
sort of tread the boards and that share their work. Do you feel that in other cities that you've performed in?
Yeah, I think every scene has their like hometown heroes. Like every scene has the people who you can rely on to be at night after night and who like things kind of orbit around. And I mean that with love because like I love seeing the same poets over and over at different nights because it's like hearing your favorite song on the radio, you know what I mean? Except it's that like delightful surprise of like, oh, they're here. I get to hear this again. Fuck yeah, this is amazing. Oh, can I curse on this podcast?
Yeah, of
I didn't
course you
ask.
can.
Fabulous. Okay, cool. Yeah, no. I that's the same in every single city, and like Leeds' scene is very strong. There's a lot of really cool nights that are very like grassroots and very, very excellent. The thing about Manchester is like there's such, or at least from my outside opinion, the style that is like most favored is different. There's a lot of incredibly grounded, like not slammy because it doesn't feel like collegiate slam, but like very grounded punk poetry that prioritizes like speaking truth to power and has a very specific kind of delivery. And that's why I felt a little bit out of like outside of my like home game advantage there. Wasn't because like it was big personalities. I was just like, oh, this is stylistically different. And my like brand of incredibly flowery earnestness may not sit supernaturally alongside these incredibly punchy deliveries that are awesome, but not a thing I feel I know how to do.
I get that. I often feel that way if I'm going somewhere new and I
Mhm.
don't necessarily know what to expect. I often feel that kind of weird anticipation, excited buzz where I'm like, oh God, I don't know if my stuff is going to go down well here. And
Mhm.
then I end up reading and people will speak to me afterwards and I'm like, oh wow, it really did resonate. And I
Yeah.
think, like you say, sometimes hearing voices that aren't with the sort of familiars within that circuit, it's really refreshing.
Mhm.
And I definitely felt that with you and a few others at that night
Mhm.
in Ancoats. But let's chat about your style. We've kind of delved a little bit into it, but what would you say your style is as a writer?
Um, Big question. I think what I'm trying to do is talk about incredibly banal things in a way that makes them feel not that. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
Like everyone, unfortunately, almost everyone you meet, and especially in poetry, has experienced being wronged at some point by someone. They've had something happen that is not ideal and something that like is both incredibly upsetting and completely unfortunately ordinary. And so you get a lot of that at poetry nights, which is understandable. It's a beautiful way to like work through trauma and work through difficult things. But I've always been really conscious about like not wounding an audience, like not hurting an audience by putting an incredibly raw, thing with no barrier up between me and them. And some authors don't do that, and that's great. Like it's their prerogative, but I never feel comfortable like being without membrane. And so by putting things in like fantasy language, by softening it, by talking about it in terms of like fable and metaphor and folklore, I think it universalizes it, which makes it a little bit less scary for me to talk about on a microphone because it's then not just my story, it's like a platonic ideal of a fable or whatever. And I think it protects the audience a little bit more too, and it makes it easier for them to take what they need and what they want from it rather than just being affronted by details of my life that maybe I don't want to share and maybe they didn't want to hear. Because in some poetry spaces, there's a lot of pressure to like make plain the catastrophe that you're talking about or the difficult thing that you're talking about. And I wanted to push back a little bit off that because I didn't think it was serving me and I didn't think it was serving an audience necessarily. And then the other half of that is like, I like talking about really magical things that are completely fake as if they're completely banal, right? So like I make the ordinary stuff completely not ordinary by throwing vampires and sirens and stuff in there. And then I have other poems that are about just literally about magic, but being like, what if you're at your kitchen table when a wizard comes in? Like, what happens there? You know what I mean? So they meet in the middle, and hopefully
I
there's
love it.
cohesion between these two approaches. I hope so, anyway.
That's amazing. Like that's such a beautiful way of looking at it as well. That kind of sort of care and protection over the audience that you
Mhm.
seem to have and take up is really quite admirable because not a lot of people from my experience do that. It's
Mhm.
often a very cathartic experience of writing poetry, getting
Mhm.
everything out there into the world, and that in turn sort of helps that individual process whatever it
Yeah.
is that they've gone through, which of course is writing
And I
generally.
definitely did. I definitely did that. And I still do. I found a way to make it sustainable because like doing rawer stuff at Mike versus Mike was beginning to really wear on me in a way that was taking away from the healing potential of writing it. You know what I mean? And
Yeah,
I've spoken to other poets who feel the same, where it's like they got a lot out of writing it, they got a lot out of performing it, but at some point the grind of that, like it's
yeah.
diminishing returns. It can start to not do what it was doing when you first did it. And so that was my way of finding my way around it.
That is so interesting that you've said that. I've kind of felt that many times before and not really been able to verbalize what it is
Hmm.
that I felt. And I think you've just verbalized it perfectly. And I'm sure a lot of other people listening, we have a lot of poets in our community that will hear this, and I'm certain they will resonate with that.
Hmm.
Um, I mean, I'm fascinated by all of the things that you get into your writing. What took you to magic and folklore and otherworldly things like that? Like, what was that something that you took inspiration from when you were younger and that just continued on?
Yeah, I mean, I was always that kid who would like go visit the park and then like kind of cajole my parents into like, just leave me here. I'm gonna build a tree house. I'm gonna live here forever. That kind of energy. And I and like one eye open being like, they'll come back. They'll come back. But if they don't, this is where the teapot goes kind of energy. Like
Yeah,
I've
yeah.
always I've always been that kid, and like starting from 12 onwards, I flirted with like different forms of neo-paganism over and over. I've always been fascinated with like magic, and my journey eventually took me away from like witchcraft proper for whatever reason. It just didn't feel completely natural to me. But what it left me with was like a profound fascination with ritual and with like putting your attention in specific places. And like I've found that writing about magic and writing about ritual makes me more attuned to positive moments in my life that I would otherwise miss, right? Like it sounds so cheesy when you put it into that kind of language, but it really is like I keep writing about magic because I desperately need to keep finding it. And writing about it helps me like it like kind of turns my like night vision goggles on for finding moments of whimsy and moments that I can't totally explain and like putting them in poetry because poetry is such a like non-naturalistic art form. I can get away with the liminality of like, do I believe this literally? Do I not literally believe this? Is this real magic? Is this like magic as metaphor? And I can blur the lines in a way that I couldn't do if I was writing like memoir or if I was writing like fiction. You know what I mean? And so
Yeah.
that's why I keep coming back to it over and over, I think. And also, like, I was a weird preteen girl at the time. Like, I ID'd as a preteen girl. Preteen girls love witches, at least in my.
Yeah, literally. Like I just speaking on a very personal note, my gran used to tell us that she was a white witch because she
Mhm.
was born on Halloween and she would talk to us about it. And every kid in our street that came to the house on Halloween was like, oh my God, this is incredible. We were
Yeah.
like that fascination, like you say, it's so, when you're younger, it is abundant. And I
Mhm.
think if that stays with you, and it doesn't really matter what that fascination is about, but that curiosity and sort of inquisitive nature can be so valuable when you do get older because it's like every day is a learning day. I was
Mhm.
literally chatting to my mum earlier on. She says every day is a learning day. And I'm like, it really is, and having that inquisitive nature about you over whatever topic you take your fancy over is a beautiful thing. And I think a lot of writing can come from that in really unexpected and beautiful ways. Like you say, you keep writing about it to remind yourself to look out for those lovely moments and magic
Mhm.
moments in your life, and that's beautiful. That is poetry in itself, guys. Take note. Oh my God. um which takes me on very nicely to your words being in print. They are in print now, aren't they? As if by
This is
magic.
yeah.
Honestly,
We stay ready. You don't gotta get ready if you stay ready.
honestly, for anyone listening, like Goodnighttheskye literally picked up their book as if on cue. That was beautifully done.
Thank you.
Talk to us about it. It's let's see the cover. Like, let's see.
So this was done by a
Oh,
beautiful artist called Emily. She did a profoundly excellent job. I sent her two things. One, I said I wanted it to be purple, and two, I sent her the image of like a circle being made by branches through the forest. And then she took that and ran with it. And I couldn't be happier with it. I think it's beautiful.
it is
Yeah.
stunning. I love, love, love the color. Like it immediately paints the picture of what to expect in the book. And I mean, little teaser, what can we expect in the book?
Yeah, so New Fables for Transformation is my debut collection, I guess. I've done little zine things here and there, but this is the first proper book, right? Like, it was published by Written Off Publishing, who I was very honored and excited to work with, and who have been absolutely great. And it's structured kind of unusually. It's in five parts. We move through the setting, the gods, the monsters, the cast, and the story, because I wanted it to feel like a journey that was not just about me, but kind of a more universal idea of a journey. And I wanted to base it on like what you have to think about when building a world in Dungeons and Dragons, basically. I was like, if my poetry is a world, just like when I'm building a world for D&D or another role-playing game or a LARP, like what are the things you have to think about? What gives the world texture? And you think about like the characters who are going to appear in it and the settings you might visit and like the deities, good or bad, that may aid you on your path, and the monsters, good or bad, who throw obstacles in your way. And so I kind of grouped the pieces based on that because I don't know, it just felt very true to me, and delightfully nerdy in a way that I'm learning to accept as a core component of myself, I guess.
I love that. That sounds absolutely incredible. Like that, yeah. I just love every bit of what you've described there, and I cannot wait to get my hands on a copy. Honestly, guys, you need to go and get a copy of this book, like right now. Right now, it is literally out. When this podcast goes live, it will be out. And we will include links, of course, in bios, descriptions, all of that jazz. Um, sounds amazing. And how's it been going so far with the book being out there?
It's been surreal. It's been really surreal. The thing about writing a poetry collection, and at least the way I've done it, because obviously I've only done this once, I don't know how it compares, but I knew that my manuscript had been shortlisted and that it just needed to be completed around like a year and a half ago. That's a long lead time. And so I had a lot of time where the collection as a whole kind of lost its glitter for me just through like repetition and ordinariness. I spent so much time picking over it and like interrogating it and like trying to find the weak spots and tighten it up and do all that jazz. And then I put it away for a really long time. And it just became like this thing, like this just object of like, yeah, I've done that, but it's no big deal. To the point where my partner had to remind me that it's kind of cool to have a book out and that like it like it's a cool thing I did. But it was just like the lead time was long enough that it got deprioritized as I focused on other projects and other things. And then it came out and like I don't want to speak too romantically because I'll make myself sound like a wanker, but it really is like it came to life the minute other people touched it. Like the second other people started reading it and I started like doing poems I've always done at open mics, or at least have for a couple of years, but like being able to pull them out of their context of the book and show the book and like have people be excited about the piece. Like it's like it became alive and I learned what it was about all over again. Like I learned the preoccupations of it by the things that other people have said to me about it and the things that other people have like found exciting about it. Like I think maybe I didn't even know what the collection was about until I put it in front of other people and they went, "Nah, this is what it's about actually."
Yeah, that's amazing. I love that. It is, I mean, speaking from my experience as well, it is a surreal experience having your book out there in the world. And it's so lovely to hear your experience of it. It gave me a little warm, fuzzy feeling in my belly. It really did. It is truly magical in every way, and it's something we've talked about a lot on this podcast. Is getting your words out there. If you know, like you say, a year and a half, or was it about a year and a half before you had it
Yeah, yeah.
published, the manuscript was ready. And sometimes the universe will give you a sign. Somebody might just give you a little nudge to get it out there into the world, and if that sign ever comes, this is your sign to take it, guys.
Yes.
Honestly,
Because
like,
I like to go into it a tiny bit. I didn't think I was ready. I didn't think it was ready, right? I didn't think I had anything to say yet. I was like, in terms of poetry, I'm a baby. I am years away from having anything that's cohesive enough to be put out by like an actual press. And then Rebecca Kenny messaged me and was like, "Hey, I'm not going to promise you anything, but I want to encourage you to try. Like, even if you don't think you're ready, there's a reason that like we've reached out to you and it's because we do think you have something to say, which is not to say it'll be a yes, but we want to see whatever it is." And like I wouldn't have done it if I hadn't been pushed to, because I that perfectionist impulse was like, "No, I'm not ready yet. I'm not mature enough. I don't know enough. I'm like I haven't practiced enough," all of that jazz. And so I threw together what to me initially felt juvenile, and then it got shortlisted and I was like, "Oh, if there's something here, I will put the work in now to make it something that I'm proud of." But yeah, in case like it's helpful to know, don't wait until you think you've got a good manuscript. If you're anything like me, you'll never think you have a good manuscript. So like, don't wait for that point because it may never come.
that is a good point. Just,
Yeah.
yeah, even if that is a really good point. Sometimes, even if it's not perfect,
Hmm.
you still have to go for it.
Hmm.
That's a really good bit of advice. And a little bit of a segue now, but I wanted to chat to you about your sort of creative practice.
Hmm.
Like we were saying before, poetry is not the only part of your day-to-day working life as a
Hmm.
creative. What do you do as a creative? Like, how have you made this mad and wacky industry work for you?
I mean, so I do a lot, do a lot of stuff. Primarily, I'm a content writer for businesses, which is, that's kind of the day job thing that a lot of us are eking out, and I enjoy it. I mean, it's not anywhere near as whimsical as the other things I do, but not only does it pay the bills, which we need it to, but it also has taught me a lot. It's taught me a lot of interpersonal skills I didn't have. I used to be terrified of like engaging with anything that I thought vaguely resembled business. Like I just would flee from it. And so having to become like a content writer who does have to work with like corporate people has taught me that like there's actually no real difference between them and us, and you can just chat to them like people. Hugely useful lesson to learn. And then outside of that, when I'm not doing that, I've led quite a few poetry workshops in schools, which I love doing. It's one of my favorite things I get to do because you cannot plan for it, and that's great. I love the surprise of that. And then I run my own poetry events, and I also spend a fair few nights DJing with my partner, which is the other thing we do. So yeah,
Nice. That's
you gotta,
amazing.
yeah,
I
lots of
love
strings on
that.
the boat.
Yeah. Oh God. Yeah. Absolutely. I feel like to be a creative that has sustained work, you kind of have to do that, and everything
Yeah.
kind of it crosses over in places you wouldn't expect, and that is so amazing to hear. even in your sort of day job, you still really enjoy it. And there's so
Mhm.
much that you've taken away from it and are still taken away from it. That's amazing. And I completely agree. When working with young people, you can plan as much as you like. It
Yep.
will go out the window in about 2 minutes. Honestly, I've had many, many instances like that. But it is wonderful to hear that you work with young people in that way. Because I feel like poetry now is so different. It is not what we were taught when we were
Mhm.
younger. I remember reading. I'm trying to think. Caroline Duffy,
Mhm.
obviously massive, massive poet, big name. I remember reading her work at high school, thinking I haven't got a clue what she's talking about, and I'm not really interested either. And when I did eventually come back to poetry and sort of fall in love with it
Mhm.
completely, I was like, how? How have I come to this point and how has my opinion changed and how do I feel so differently now? And
Mhm.
I think it was partly just an age thing. Like
Yeah.
I was much older, much had much more life experience under my belt. But I think I heard poets in very sort of contemporary ways that were reading about day-to-day things, very relatable things. And I was like, oh wow, suddenly my eyes were opened at what it could actually be.
Yeah.
Um, and I think it was at that point that I sort of realized that poetry can be anything. It
Mhm.
doesn't have to fit into any sort of mold. It can be anything. And that's the beautiful thing about art. Um, yeah, I went on a bit of a tangent there, didn't
No, I
I?
love it. I love it.
Honestly, this often happens. So we have come to that point in the podcast where I like to gain a bit of advice from you for other creatives, because I mean, it's a very difficult industry to get into, and as
Mhm.
we've talked about, sort of sustaining yourself and your practice and your work in this industry is it can be quite challenging and often our skills can sort of cross over in many ways. So for anybody that's coming into this industry as perhaps a newbie or they're taking their first steps into poetry, whatever it may be, what would be your advice to them?
Um, chase fun. Like chase fun. Chase curiosity. Don't be afraid to say yes to things that you don't think you're quite ready for yet, because either you're completely underestimating yourself and you are ready, or you will learn because you will have to. Necessity will force you to learn, and you'll get the last 20% of the way there on the job, which I have done. That's the whimsical advice. The not so whimsical advice is check your day rate with other people. Have friends who can look at your day rate and go, yeah, that seems about right. Because otherwise, you may be undercharging yourself quite significantly, and that's not a great feeling. Having other friends in the business or in adjacent businesses is not just valuable but completely essential, because you don't, if you're not talking to other people, you don't know your worth, and it's really tricky to navigate what is a very stressful like world to be in and water to swim through. So have friends.
That is such a good point, actually. It's something that even in like acting or performing,
Mhm.
I've had many a phone call with my best friend Jazz, who also runs Blue Balloon Theatre, and we've gone, yeah, but what's the day rate? And is
Yeah.
it meeting equity minimum and all of this kind of stuff? And it's like it is so important because if you're going to do the job, you need to make sure that you're getting paid the right amount. And obviously, it is quite
Hmm.
difficult for writers and poets because when you are first stepping into it, you might not necessarily know. So I cannot agree
Hmm.
more with what you're saying. It having a few friends who've maybe been doing it a little while longer is
Yeah.
quite beneficial. But if that isn't the case and you're really sort of unsure of how to make those connections, message people, like
Hmm.
drop people a message on social media if needs be, and ask. There's no harm in asking. Very, very sound advice. I enjoy the whimsical advice. I think that's my
Whimsical
favorite
advice is
word.
good, but then it's also like have someone hold your hand the first time you do self-assessment, or you'll cry about it. Like
Yeah,
these are things you learn from experience.
yeah. Self-employed life, man. This is what we get. No, honestly, that is, yeah, could not agree more. Could not agree more. So Goodnighttheskye, what is coming up next for you? What have you got in the lineup?
So we're on the cusp of announcing a very cool thing for my little baby events company, Words with Fangs. We do in-person events quarterly in Leeds, that are poetry showcases with a trans and non-binary focus primarily. But we're moving in, without saying too much, in February, we're moving into a little remote thing so that we can reach more people and get more people involved in our little crazy world. So I'm very excited about that. I'm gigging all over in 2025. Find me on Instagram. I'll post about it. I'll be up and down the country wherever feels like having me. And then I maybe have some cheeky little things related to Ren, Fair, and LARP and poetry that is something I've never done before. So I can't say too much about it yet, but I'm very excited.
Oh, very mysterious. I like it. That honestly, that sounds amazing. And what is your Instagram? Where can we find you?
You can find me at Goodnighttheskye on Instagram only. I tried to kick myself out of Twitter and ended up locked out of Twitter, and it's been the best thing I've ever done. So I don't have that anymore. So mostly you can find me on Instagram and Substack occasionally under Goodnighttheskye as well.
Amazing. Well, it's been an absolute treat to have you on this podcast, Like, thank you so much. And for anyone that's listening, we hope you've enjoyed it. Anyone that's watched on YouTube, thank you for watching. Leave a like, leave a comment. If you've got any questions, ask us because we love a good question. And if you've been listening on Spotify, thank you again for your support. Again, you can leave comments on Spotify. This is a new thing that I keep talking about. I love it. You
That's
can
so
comment
cool.
on podcast. Honestly, I need to get a life. I really do. But Goodnighttheskye, you have been such a wonderful guest, and what a brilliant podcast episode to finish the year on. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you very, very much. I'm excited, and thank you for the honor of being your last one of 2024. How cool! Very cool.
I love that. Well, thank you so much, guys. Have a wonderful Christmas, and we'll see you in 2025. Oh, bye.